Hello and welcome. My name is Carolyn Pitts. For over 25 years, I have been a health coach certified by the American Council on Exercise. If you're new to my channel, every week I share health and wellness tips to help you be your best self, body, mind, and spirit. This is not the video I intended to produce this week. My intention was to give you some helpful, healthful, plant-based sources for calcium to help improve your bone health. But as I started to do my research, I came across some surprising, dare I say even shocking, information that caused me to pivot and go in a different direction. Some of what I might share might shock you like it shocked me, but be assured links to all of my reference data are in the description, so feel free to go look at that and come to your own conclusions. I want to start by talking about something called the calcium paradox. This is a term that was coined by the World Health Organization and the United Nations in response to a meta-analysis that revealed incidence of hip fractures as a measure of bone health are significantly lower in countries with very low consumption of milk and other dairy products. This meta-analysis looked at 72 different studies across 63 countries that were conducted over a 60-year time frame between 1950 and 2011. Now, if you're like me, that information kind of set me back on my heels a little bit. That flies in the face of everything I was ever taught about calcium and bone health. You know, when I was growing up, in grade school, when we went through the line in the cafeteria, they always plopped a cardboard carton of milk down on our tray. We didn't have bottled water then, and you certainly didn't have soda in school. Milk was what we were given to drink. And when I got home, I remember my mom would, being a good mom and wanting to make sure that we had plenty of milk so we could build strong bones, my mom would stir Nestle's Quick. I love the strawberry flavor. We also got chocolate. She would stir that into the milk to encourage us to drink it. I was a fiend for grilled cheese sandwiches all the way up into adulthood. I ate them a lot. And ice cream, yeah, you know it. And fruited yogurt. I went through years where I ate fruited yogurt every day. Either for lunch or as like my mid-afternoon snack. So despite all of that dairy in my diet, I was diagnosed with osteopenia, which is a precursor to osteosporosis, in my 40s. It didn't shock me. My mom had osteosporosis. Her mom had osteosporosis. I was kind of anticipating that it would happen. But now that I sit and think about it, isn't it interesting that all those years, all that dairy didn't protect me? Because I never thought about that there was kind of a disconnect there. We're taught that dairy makes strong bones. I didn't have strong bones. I ate a lot of dairy. Yeah, that's a paradox that I didn't quite connect before doing my research this week. I mentioned in the past that when it comes to looking at research papers, research studies, there's certain things you want to look for. You want to consider how many participants were in the study. How long did the study go on? How long were they following those participants? Was the study published in a reputable peer-reviewed journal? How old is the study? And it's not always easy to find out, but if you can, who funded the study? Who put up the funding to pay for the research? So I've been thinking about studies related to nutrition and bone health, because I've been looking at a lot of them this week. And there's a couple other things to consider when we're looking at those types of studies. For one, these long-range studies are relying on people's self-reporting of their dietary dairy calcium intake. They don't lock participants into a lab and control everything that they eat for a couple of years. So they're relying on what people share in response to surveys or interviews about what they were eating. And when we're looking at studies that are asking people to go back and think about their calcium intake in their earlier years, they're really relying on their memory as well. For example, I came across references to studies that concluded that high milk consumption during adolescence increased the risk for hip fractures later in life. So those studies are relying on participants being able to recall how much dairy they were consuming when they were teenagers. A second thing to consider is that we eat a variety of foods, and foods can have interactions, and maybe what you're seeing as far as how somebody's hip bone health, measuring that, maybe it's not related to the dairy but to something else in the diet. So for example, we know that whole wheat interferes with the absorption of calcium in the body. So if a person is consuming part of their daily dietary intake of dairy as milk poured on top of whole wheat cereal, they're eating the dairy, but their body's not getting the dairy. Another thing to consider would be environment. A person who works in a very active job may have better bone health simply because of the exercise that they're doing, because weight-bearing exercise helps to strengthen bones, as opposed to someone who just sits at a desk all day. And also, whether they're working outside or inside. Someone who works outside is exposed to a lot of sunlight, and sunlight helps their body generate vitamin D. And so what you're seeing as far as bone health may be the result of the vitamin D that they're getting from the sunlight, more so than the calcium that they're ingesting. I found a study, an 18-year study, so that's pretty decently long, involving 72,000, pretty decent amount, post-menopausal women, and it concluded, and I quote, "An adequate vitamin D intake is associated with a lower risk of osteoporotic hip fractures in postmenopausal women. Neither milk nor a high calcium diet appears to reduce the risk." And then a fourth thing to consider is the quality of the milk and the milk's production process. In 1993, the FDA in the United States approved a bovine growth hormone that increased milk production in cows by nearly 33%. And that took the annual production of pounds of milk per cow from 15,000 pounds to nearly 20,000 pounds. And before you reach for your calculator, because I did this, that's 55 pounds of milk per cow per day. I don't know, I find that kind of astounding. But that particular bovine growth hormone is banned in Canada and the EU. You cannot buy milk from a cow that was treated with that growth hormone. But going back to the studies, that means that the milk that people in the United States are consuming could be somewhat chemically different or altered from milk that people in other countries are consuming. So let's come back to the calcium paradox. We've got all these unknowns around this study. We don't know whether people in one country were outdoors more often, whether they were more active, what else was going on in their diet. But regardless of all that, I think one conclusion we can safely make is that in countries where people ate little to no dairy, they had good bone health. So there's not a dependence on dairy to have good bone health, because the incidence of hip fractures in those countries was statistically significantly lower than the other countries in the study. And this graph that I'm showing you is from a 2020 review in the New England Journal of Medicine, a reputable peer-reviewed journal. All right, so how much calcium do we need for good health? Well, the answer depends on who you ask. The World Health Organization recommends 500 milligrams per day. In the United Kingdom, the recommendation is slightly higher at 700 milligrams per day. All right, and you're wondering, what about in the United States? Well, the USDA has two recommendations. For people who are under 50 years of age, it's 1,000 milligrams per day. So that's double what the WHO recommends. And for people who are over 50, it's 1,200 milligrams per day. According to a 2020 article in the New England Journal of Medicine, the USDA recommendation is based on a study that lasted for 2 to 3 weeks and included 155 participants. So I went over to the USDA website and I was able to confirm that is the size and the length of the study based on information on the USDA's own website. And while I was out there searching for it, I stumbled across a post from 2007 stating that the guidelines from the USDA may be excessive because another study had been done that concluded that there's only so much calcium our bodies can intake from our diet on a daily basis. And all the extra calcium that we eat is just being peed out. But even though this post was on the USDA's own site, the official guidance hasn't changed. So here's the U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA, version of recommendations. You know, if you may remember the good old food pyramid, that was phased out a while ago. And now the USDA uses something called My Plate. And you see there that dairy is up there in the corner like a little glass of milk. And if you read the details, they are recommending 3 servings of dairy products per day. And that would be like a 1 cup serving of milk or equivalent serving of a dairy product like cheese or yogurt. Interestingly, the My Plate details encourage consumption of low-fat dairy products. Well, I mean, haven't we all been told for a long time, pick skim milk or 1% milk or 2% milk, the lowest fat composition that you can tolerate because that's better for you? Well, going back to the article I found in the New England Journal of Medicine, and I'm going to read again, this is a quote. Among 12,829 adolescents, so that's a pretty good population size, followed for 3 years, so that's a decent length of time. Intake of low-fat milk was positively associated with gain in body mass index, or BMI, but intakes of full-fat milk and dairy fat were not. Now, if you've been watching my channel for a while, you know you got to take BMI with a grain of salt because it looks at how tall you are versus how much you weigh, and it uses that to determine how fat or fit you are. But it doesn't always work. So for someone who is perhaps on the short side but works out and they've got a lot of muscle, they're going to weigh more. And so that can throw the BMI off. But in a lot of these research studies, height and weight are about the only thing they can easily measure, because trying to do body fat analysis can be very time consuming and expensive. So basically, what they're saying is that drinking low fat milk caused people to go up in their BMI index, essentially saying that they gained weight, whereas full fat milk did not. That's really mind blowing for me. All right, maybe for you too. Okay, so in 2017, Harvard Medical School published their own version of the MyPlate. And in the Harvard version, the recommendation around dairy is to limit milk or dairy to no more than 1 to 2 servings per day. And in the accompanying text on the Harvard site, it says, and again, I'm going to quote, "MyPlate recommends dairy at every meal, even though there is little, if any, evidence that high dairy intake protects against osteoporosis, and there is considerable evidence that too high intakes can be harmful." Okay, so in closing, I'm going to go back to this article from the New England Journal of Medicine. And again, it's the link to this is in the description. You can go read the whole article for yourself. But I'm just going to read the conclusion, or part of the conclusion. "In our opinion, the current recommendation to greatly increase consumption of dairy foods to 3 or more servings per day does not appear to be justified. The optimal intake of milk for an individual will depend on overall diet quality. If diet quality is low, especially for children in low-income environments, dairy foods can improve nutrition, whereas if dairy quality is high, increased intake is unlikely to provide substantial benefits and harms are possible. When consumption of milk is low, the 2 nutrients of primary concern, calcium and vitamin D, can be obtained from other foods or supplements without the potential negative consequences of dairy foods. For calcium, alternative dairy sources include kale, broccoli, tofu, nuts, beans, and fortified orange juice. For vitamin D, supplements can provide adequate intake at a far lower cost than fortified milk. Pending additional research, guidelines for milk and equivalent dairy foods ideally should designate an acceptable intake, such as 0 to 2 servings per day for adults. De-emphasize reduced fat milk as preferable to whole milk, and discourage consumption of sugar-sweetened dairy foods in populations with high rates of overweight and obesity." So sugar-sweetened dairy foods, I think, would be like when my dear mom was putting Nestle Quick in the milk so I would drink it. I think sometimes in schools they offer flavored milk to encourage the children to drink it. Or fruited yogurt. I mentioned earlier, I spent years eating fruited yogurt practically every day, and I never bothered to turn around the carton and look at the nutrition information and how much sugar is added to fruited yogurt. I thought it was sweet because of the fruit. Check your labels, my friends, because they add a lot of sugar. Yogurt's very tart, and Americans are used to much sweeter tasting foods, so check your labels on that. Okay, that's a lot. I don't usually make such a long video, but there was a lot of information to share. I left out a lot, but I'm including the resources so you can go do some digging on your own and come to your own conclusions. If this content appeals to you, never miss a video by going to intendwell.us and joining my email list once a week on Friday morning. I will send you a short email with a link to my content for the week. I will not spam your inbox. I will not email you every day. And if you decide that content is not what you want to keep looking at, I make it super easy to unsubscribe. Thank you for your time. If you stayed with me, I appreciate it so very much. Have a beautiful day. Intend peace, intend love, and intend well.